Welcome to Blackbriar Gaming. Today we're going to look at a bit of a different Gar Saxon deck. I've seen most people pairing him with Cunning to boost the numerous well-costed shielded units, but I think that deck's just a bit too fair. I really like the Vigilance Aggression Villain Shell, and I think Gar offers that deck something unique. He enables your shielded Vigilance units to trade into more expensive units or swing into your opponent's base with a bit more power in the late game. And he gives you a really decent body at 6 resources to trade into your enemy's unit and maintain ball control through the mid game. First, let's get a look at Gar's card. On his leader side, he's pretty basic. He says each friendly upgraded unit gets +1, +0. So essentially when a friendly unit has an upgrade on it, it gets to swing with a bit more power and defend with a bit more power as well. When we're talking upgrades, this includes things like experience and shields, which is what we're excited about. It also includes any upgrade that you play, as well as bounties as well that your opponent may play on you. Not bounties they have inherent to them, it should be noted. When he goes over to his unit side at 6 resources, when you deploy him, he has 4 power and 7 health, which is a pretty nice stat line. He's got the Imperial, Mandalorian, and Official tags, which are all really important and useful. And his card reads, each friendly upgraded unit gets +1, +0, which is the same as his flip side, and gains when defeated, you may return an upgrade that was attached to this unit to its owner's hand. That's interesting. So any of your units that are upgraded, if they get defeated while your leader is deployed, that upgrade will come back to your hand. So it means you can play some upgrades with a bit more surety that they won't be wasted if that unit gets taken out. They'll at least be coming back to your hand so that you can use them later and replay them. So he's pretty good, right? Let's get into the deck and see what it looks like. Now, you'll notice right away that this deck is far more unit heavy than what we were seeing out of the Vigilance Aggression decks in Set 1. This is because I think we're seeing a lot better Vigilance units in Set 2, and because I want to take advantage of Gar's ability where I can. In particular, when I first saw the client, I knew I had to make him work, and I think this is probably his best deck, making him far less convenient for aggro and mid-range decks to run units into at 3 power when he's still shielded, and they will have to deal with him. You can't leave a card like the client out on the board. I'll get to him in more detail when we start talking through our turn plays. Now, if you're able to get Long Pike down and keep those shields coming, the two of them can just be an absolute nuisance. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let's talk through the deck, looking first at Tornado plays and then getting into the events and upgrades. So we'll start with our 2-cost drops. I've only included 2 in this deck. We have the Pike Sentinel on the ground arena, and we've got Kylo's TIE Silencer in space. Now, the Pike Sentinel is a Sentinel, funnily enough, the only, I believe, 2-drop Sentinel that we've got, although I did see there was a recent 2-drop Command Sentinel that gains command when you've got another green unit out, or command unit out, I should say, so that's really cool. But for villains, we have the Pike Sentinel, which is just something that heroes don't have. This is why I really like Villain Vigilance. I think it's just got some tools that heroes are lacking. So the Pike Sentinel, pretty simple stuff. It's a 2/3 Sentinel. Nothing here to gain advantage of Gar's ability, but certainly my favorite thing to do is play an Entrenched on this guy, turn 2, which turns him into, that would be, let's see, +3/+3. That'd turn him into a 6/6 because of Gar's ability, which having a 6/6 Sentinel at the start of turn 2 is just super obnoxious for your opponent to have to try and get through if they're pushing the ground arena. Now, in space, just to protect ourselves, we've got the Kylo's TIE Silencer. This unit is going to see itself in so many decks. This just allows us to trade with an early turn opponent's space unit. Whether it be Red 3, whether it be an A-Wing. A-Wing obviously is fantastic because it's only doing 1 damage in return, but it's a very aggressive card that allows us to just make sure we're doing some good trades in the space arena, so we're not getting overrun too early before our kind of mid-game control comes into effect, because we'll see later on that our early game control is very much around causing damage to non-vehicle units and through the Force Choke, but we'll get into that later. So only two drops. That's because it's not really vital to our game plan to have a unit out that early as it would be with an aggro deck. This is very much a mid-range deck, leaning on the control side with a pretty strong late game. So that first turn isn't as important to us. And if we're simply claiming the initiative to play a open fire or a power of the dark side to open up turn 2, we're not too upset about it. So talking about turn 2, we have only one 3-drop unit, and that is the Client. Now the Client is as I said, a 3-resource unit, Vigilance Villain, 2 power, 5 health, and shielded. So straight away he's getting that bonus from Gar to be a 3/5 while he's still shielded, which means that your opponent's turn 1 plays to trade into him, it's going to really cost them. And an aggro deck in particular can't really leave the Client just sitting around, because his action is that you choose a unit, and for this phase, it gains bounty, heal 5 damage from a base. Now, of course, as a control-y kind of deck, we're going to be wanting to take out our opponent's units. That's what our early game is all about. So having the Client enabling us to heal 5 damage every single time we do that, starting from turn 3, is crazy. So your opponent will have to deal with them. They'll be taking 3 damage the first time they run a unit into them, which will probably kill it. They'll then have to get through another 5 damage because that first one is just hitting into the shield, right? So that's probably at least one other unit or one event, noting that those aggro decks really won't have much removal, if at all. So they're probably going to have to run another 2 units in them. So the Client has the ability to soak up probably 3 units attacks while killing at least the first one that goes into him because of Gar's ability, and at the same time healing your base. So I just think in this deck, in a Gar Saxon deck, the Client is such a strong unit and such a powerhouse and such an absolute menace for your opponent to deal with. So there we go. That's our 3-cost unit. Going into turn 3, when we're talking about units, we've got 2 4-drops. The first is Long Pike, which I think just belongs in this deck beautifully. It is a 4-resource unit, Vigilance Villain. It's got 4 power, 6 health, and on attack, you may give a shield token to an enemy unit, and if you do, give a shield token to a friendly unit. Now, because our mid-game removal doesn't really care about shields at all, that being Power of the Dark Side, Takedown, and Rivals Fall, you don't so much mind giving shields to your opponent's units, particularly if they happen to be exhausted and you're going to have initiative first up next turn, so you can make sure they're not getting any kind of advantage out of that shield, and then you just remove them off the table, and that shield means nothing. Whereas the shield that you're giving to your friendly units, well, that could be going on to really anything you've got on the board, because it not only protects it and makes sure you're trading in beautifully with it, but it also gives it that boost as well. So Long Pike was very much made for this deck. It also has the added advantage of having Smuggle for only 5, which is only 1 extra, which is really nice. So you don't mind resourcing this unit if you don't need it at that particular time, and bringing it in the late game to start shielding up your big bombs to protect them, and also give them added power. So there we go. We've also got a couple of system patrol craft over in space, just to make sure we're maintaining a bit of a presence in the space arena and locking it down where we can to hold off an opponent who's going heavy into space. Then we move into turn 4 with our 5-resource unit. We've got the Super Commando Squad. This one, obviously made with Gar, it's his henchman, right? It's got those 3 tags again, Imperial, Mandalorian, and Trooper. It is a 4/4 shielded Sentinel. Now, it does only have Sentinel when it's upgraded, but as it's coming in shielded, it will start as a Sentinel, so your opponent will have to run into it, and it will have 5 power instead of 4. So that's going to be just punishing for any unit that has to go into it, because that 5 power is a real sweet spot for those kind of more strong 3-cost and 4-cost units. And once it loses its shield, yes, it loses power, yes, it loses Sentinel, but if you happen to have Long Pike out, well, you just chuck a shield back on it, don't you? And then it's just an endless hurdle, an endless menace for your opponent to have to deal with. As you can see, we're only really having 1 unit at each of the early and mid-game price points, because we have a bunch of events that are going to be used as well to keep your opponent's board under control. But we will get to those a little later. At the 6 cost spot, we have the Cargo Juggernaut. This is a really reliable unit that was used in quite a few decks in set 1, and I think we'll continue to see it in set 2, and it's especially good in this deck because that shielded does, of course, give it that extra pip of power. So it is a 5/6 shielded, and when played, of course, if you've got a blue unit, and you'll see that all of our early turn plays, except for Kylo's TIE Silencer, are blue units, so that's pretty reliable. It's also coming down on the same turn that Gar is potentially deploying if you want to, so having that other blue unit to heal 4 damage is pretty reliable off your base. So it's doing healing, it's swinging for 5 while still shielded, which is actually quite nice. So once again, your opponent's going to have to do something about this. While a 4-power unit might not have been as big of a threat, a 5-power unit just makes a real difference. That extra pip just makes such a difference for nice trades. And yes, the shield then goes, but if Lompike's around, it's coming back. So that is the Cargo Juggernaut. Getting into Count Dooku, not very popular in set 1, probably won't be very popular in set 2, but having him come down as a 6/4 instead of a 5/4, once again, just makes him that bit more threatening. He is shielded, and that's why his power goes up to 6 because of Gar, and when played, you may defeat a unit with 4 or less remaining HP. So he's doing a bit of board control. That's why he works quite nicely in a more mid-range controlling deck, because he's wiping something with only 4 HP as he's being played. So he has that impact, much like Emperor Palpatine does at the 8 cost spot. So Emperor Palpatine, he's got Overwhelm, no upgrade on this guy here, so you won't be getting any value from him from Gar, but he's just such a good unit. You've seen that I've only included 2 of each of Count Dooku, Palpatine, and Supreme Leader Snoke. That's because they're my bombs, right? And the different bombs will have different purposes and different uses against different decks, so it just allows you to get the one that you're looking for in that late game, and not have your hand too inundated with big cards that you can't do anything with. So Emperor Palpatine, when played, deals 6 damage divided as you choose among enemy units. Just fantastic. He will continue to be fantastic, and this deck is very easily able to get to the late game where you're able to play him because of the ability to remove so many of your opponent's units with all of the removal events that we're playing. I've included Snoke in here. I just think Snoke is so much fun and he's such a cool unit. I can't help but wanting to play with him. This deck is a really good example of where he could belong. Each enemy unit getting -2/-2 means it'll just shut down those aggro decks when he hits the board, having such a huge impact if there's a bunch of units and they've started to overrun you. I've included Supreme Leader Snoke instead of Super Laser Blast to kind of serve the same purpose, and that is to really control the board on that 8 resource turn that he comes down, but doing it in a really different way. The way we're doing it here is very much to reduce the damage that's coming in while not necessarily killing all of their units. That -2 might finish off a couple, that is -2 to their health. It probably won't, but that's where our events come in. We've got a couple of damage events, specifically Force Choke and Open Fire, and putting that -2 onto units in the late game means that those bigger units with, let's say, 6 or 7 health are now within range of our Force Choke or Open Fires to be able to take them out. So Supreme Leader Snoke works really beautifully with those really cheap red or aggression events. So that's Snoke over in space for 9 resources. We then jump up to Avenger. I think Avenger will still see a lot of play in set 2. It's just an amazing card and it works really beautifully in this deck, because we've got so much removal to support it as well, which means that your opponent won't really be able to put down cheap units to soak up that when played and on attack ability, and you will be taking out your opponent's late game units with the Avenger. So that is all of our units. It is quite unit heavy for this kind of deck because we want to take advantage of Gar's ability. Moving into events, Force Choke and Open Fire I've already talked about. They're really handy for those early turns, and this is why this kind of control deck, a aggression and vigilance, I think it's mid-range, right? But the aggression events are really handy against aggro because they just hit a little earlier and are a bit cheaper. We don't have many Force units to get advantage of Force Choke. You know what? Saying that though, in the late game we do. So Force Choke is only going to cost you 1 in the late game once Dooku, Palpatine, and Snoke start hitting the board. But Open Fire doing 4 damage to a unit is just absolutely wonderful and is really handy against certain space units like Millennium Falcon or your opponent's system Patrol Craft or Punisher, which I think is going to be super popular. So Open Fire is an absolute must. Power of the Dark Side will just continue to be absolutely amazing. It just, if they have one unit on the board, doesn't matter if it's a leader or whatever it is gone, which means they have to play around it too. So it's going to really change up the way your opponent plays, knowing that you have this, and they have to assume you will if you're playing Vigilance Villain. I think it's probably the best removal card in the game for only 3. Then you've got Takedown, 5 or less HP, really handy again with Snoke, getting those big late game units down to that 5 HP space. And that's why I've gone with Takedown more so than, what's it called? The one where he's holding up the egg, the Tusken Raider. It's, you know, the one that hits for things with strong power instead of remaining HP. So I think Takedown and Snoke work really beautifully together. And then I've included 3 Rivals Fall. I often see decks including a few less, but noting that at that 6 resource space, we don't really have any more Sentinels coming down. I think Rivals Fall is going to be really useful for taking out opponents' leaders, because Gar's not necessarily fantastic at it either. For the upgrades, we've got Top Target. I think Top Target's just absolutely amazing. Along with the Client, it just gives you so much potential healing. Every single Vigilance deck that I'm building at the moment has Top Target in it. I can't help myself. Maybe I'll work out one day that it's not that great, but in this kind of deck where you really want to be taking out their units, I think it is. You're spending 1 and potentially healing 6. It's just so good. Then Entrenched as well. Entrenched I think is wonderful because it allows you to play it on your units, which you're really happy with. As I said, a great opening for your turn 2 is to chuck down an Entrenched on a Pike Sentinel and giving it all that extra health as well as that extra pip of power on top of the 3 that Entrenched are giving it. So, noting that the upgrades work with Gar's ability, I think Entrenched is just really nice for your early turn plays and your mid game plays, because you don't really mind about hitting your opponent's base until the late game. You can also, alternatively, if you're suffering in space in particular, because we're not that strong in that arena until our Avenger comes down, and you don't want to be using the Avenger to take out opponent's units anyway, chucking an Entrenched on an opponent's space unit until you can deal with it with one of your events for removal is a great option to make sure that it's not just swinging into your base turn after turn if your TIE Silencer or Patrol Craft don't turn up. Now, going into the sideboard is set up to be more aggressive versus control. You can see that I haven't gone down the Vigilance and Restock route here. It's not a way that I like to play, and with so many big bomb cards, I think we can really push damage instead. So, if I were going into a match with control, I'd probably be taking out Pike Sentinels, the Force Chokes, a couple Entrenched, and a couple of top targets, and I'd be slotting in some Armed to the Teeth. Now, this might be a bit of a janky card, but its synergy with Gar, especially when he's deployed and it comes back to your hand and you can just keep playing it, I think is really nice. Essentially, for 2 resource, attach unit gains on attack, give another friendly unit +2 for this phase. So if you've got a couple of resources out, this can potentially be 4 damage out of hand in a way, and being able to smuggle it as well is really nice, because you wouldn't be looking for this in the early game. You'd very much want it to play later on. It gives +2 damage. So +4 damage potential here, and you can smuggle it. And because it's with Gar, we're actually looking at +6 damage, right? +3 to the unit that you put it on, and no, sorry, it'll be +5, and then give another unit +2. But when he's deployed, the fact that it's coming back to your hand instead of being destroyed, because your opponent will definitely go after the unit that you put this on, I think that's really nice as well. You've then got a House Cast Soldier, just an early 2-drop, because if we're going a bit more aggressive against control, we probably want to be pushing the board a little earlier. And same, it's the same reason I've included Punishing One. Now, I like the House Cast Soldier because it's got that Saboteur, and I think shields are going to be quite common in this set. So having Saboteur there and being able to get around Sentinels as well, I think is really handy. Punishing One, as I said before, it's a great unit. I think we'll see a lot of them. It's a 3/4 in space, which is great stats for 3. And when an upgraded enemy unit is defeated, you may ready this unit. So that's going to be quite nice to use, because I think we're going to see a lot of upgraded enemy units out there in this meta. And lastly, a couple of Bravado. So this reads, if you defeated an enemy unit this phase, this event costs 2 less to play. I really like this with Avenger, because Avenger is defeating a unit when you attack with it, and then you follow up with a Bravado for only 3. This has to be on the next turn that you play the Avenger, obviously. But being able to swing in a couple of times with your Avenger, that's just really good. So having some cheeky Bravados there against control decks, because they won't be able to necessarily deal with that Avenger straight away, and they might be relying on waiting another turn to get rid of it, and Bravado could just absolutely finish that game out. So that's why I've got that one in here, and I think it works really nicely with the big units that we're playing in this deck. All right, that's it. That's the deck. If we look at the cost curve, it starts pretty big on the two resource cards there. That's because we're playing events and of course our entrenched as well, but you've got a lot of play in the late game there with all of your Supreme Leader Snokes and Palpatines, Dooku's, and Avenger as well. Analysis of the deck. So my main concern I've got with for this type of Gar Saxon aggression deck is, does Darth Vader do it better? And the answer may be yes. To really take advantage of Gar's ability and traits, you'd probably want to look at running a more Mandalorian and upgrade heavy deck, but while that deck may be more thematic, I'm just not sure it's stronger. Saying all that, this deck lets you get some value out of units that might otherwise not find their way into a more event-heavy Vigilance aggression deck that you'd be running with Vader or Iden. It's a bit unique in what it wants to be doing and how it's going about it. In this way, you can get away with running a bunch of heavy hitters, which are always a blast to get on the table, and Snoke in particular is just too much fun not to include. I think this is a fun mid-range deck with a strong late game that will give you something decent to play in casual events or games with your mates. I probably wouldn't take it to a competitive tournament, and probably wouldn't take Gar Saxon to a competitive tournament in any pairing. As I said previously, he just seems a bit fair compared to some of the other shenanigans that Set 2 leaders are throwing around. Saying that, I think is a really solid limited choice, and I'd definitely be looking to build him in a draft or sealed event, including a lot of the cards that we see here. I think Gar Saxon will be quite popular in the early meta of Shadows of the Galaxy, and this is a fun alternative way to run him outside of pairing with Cunning. He's a straightforward leader, his ability is easy to build around and take advantage of during a game. This deck has a decent matchup against aggro, mid-range, and control. Let me know in the comments anything you'd change or other cards you'd include. Always interested to make my deck stronger with the wisdom of YouTube. And that brings us to the end of our Unlimited chats for today. Thank you so much for watching. My plan is to keep the Star Wars Unlimited content coming, so if you enjoyed this video, go on ahead and subscribe. Importantly, make sure to keep cracking those packs and getting unleashed for Unlimited.